The planet Zyphora was alive in a way that made every human soldier uneasy. Strange purple vines curled across the jagged rocks, releasing clouds of sparkling pollen that glowed faintly in the dim sunlight. The air smelled sharp like ozone after a storm, and the ground trembled occasionally as if the planet itself was breathing. For Captain Elias Kane, this was nothing new. He had faced alien worlds before, but Zyphora had a feeling of danger that was different. It was intelligent. Watching, waiting. Elias crouched behind a jagged rock outcropping with his squad, scanning the battlefield through his visor. Across the cratered plains, alien forces were gathering. They were unlike anything he had seen before. Sleek, multi-limbed warriors with glimmering carapaces, moving with an eerie coordination. At their center, towering above the rest, was the alien queen. She moved with a graceful authority, every step measured, every gesture precise. Even from this distance, Elias could feel the weight of her presence. She was more than a leader. She was a symbol of her people's power, their intelligence, and their will to fight. "Squad, get ready," Elias whispered. His voice was steady, but his mind raced. He had fought against countless enemies, but something about this battle felt different. The aliens were not mindless beasts. They were thinking, calculating, adapting. Every tactic the humans tried seemed anticipated. A sudden roar echoed across the battlefield. Alien soldiers surged forward, their movements fluid and terrifying. Explosions erupted around Elias's team as they opened fire. The sky filled with tracer beams and pulses of energy. Humans and Zyphorians clashed with a force that shook the ground beneath them. Elias moved with practiced precision, firing, ducking, and directing his squad. Yet amidst the chaos, his eyes kept returning to the queen. She was everywhere at once, coordinating her forces with sharp, almost hypnotic gestures. Then it happened. Something unexpected. The queen faltered. Her movement slowed. Elias saw her knees buckle, her arms drop slightly. A murmur passed through the alien ranks, and for the first time they seemed uncertain. Elias didn't hesitate. He signaled his squad to hold their position and, almost against his better judgment, sprinted toward her. The battlefield was chaotic, full of screams, energy pulses, and explosions, but Elias's focus narrowed. He could see now that the queen was not injured by weapons. She was exhausted, her chest rising and falling rapidly as if she had been carrying a tremendous weight for too long. He ignored the protests of his squad over comms. No one had ever seen him do this before. Soldiers were trained to kill, to survive, not to show mercy to the enemy. But Elias didn't see a monster. He saw life, and he could not let it die if there was a choice. When he reached her, the queen had collapsed fully onto the rocky ground. Her armored carapace shimmered under the sunlight, but it was cracked in places, not from battle damage, but from sheer exhaustion. Her many eyes blinked up at him, wide with confusion and something else. Fear, perhaps, or trust. Elias knelt beside her carefully, avoiding the sharp edges of her limbs, and lifted her as gently as he could. The queen was massive, but his training had taught him how to carry heavy loads. Even so, he felt her weight settle heavily into his arms, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the two of them. Around him, the battlefield seemed to fade. His squad froze, unsure whether to fire, retreat, or come to his aid. He ignored them. There was only him and her, and the urgent need to survive. The queen made no hostile move. She only blinked up at him, her antennae twitching slightly. Elias spoke softly, though he doubted she understood. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." He could feel her tremble, a shiver that ran through her entire body. She was not attacking. She was not commanding. She was simply tired. Moving backward toward a safer area was a struggle. Every step had to be careful, dodging bursts of alien fire and falling debris. Elias's muscles burned, but he did not falter. He had carried wounded soldiers before, but never an enemy. Never one so massive, and never one who could have ended him in an instant. Yet he felt a strange certainty. This was the right thing to do. Saving her might not only stop the fighting now, it could change the course of the war entirely. Finally, he reached a small rocky ridge that offered cover. He gently lowered the queen onto a flat surface, making sure she was stable. She lay there, breathing heavily, her limbs curled slightly as if she were a child instead of the fearsome leader of an alien army. Elias crouched beside her, inspecting her carefully. Her skin, or exoskeleton, was not hard and cold as he had expected. It had warmth to it, subtle vibrations beneath the surface that spoke of life and intelligence. He reached out a hand, hesitating for only a moment before touching her arm. The response was almost imperceptible, a tiny ripple, but it was enough to tell him she was conscious of his presence. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. He didn't know if she understood him, but the act of speaking made the moment less terrifying. The queen twitched, lifting one of her many eyes to meet his gaze. Elias felt an odd connection, like looking at a mind that was vast, full of experiences and intelligence he could barely comprehend. His squad finally caught up, their expressions a mix of confusion and anger. "Captain, what are you doing?" one of them shouted. "She's our enemy!" Elias ignored him. "She's not injured from us," he replied firmly. "She's exhausted. Something's wrong." His intuition screamed at him that this was more than just a battlefield collapse. He didn't yet know why, but he sensed a deeper story, a threat beyond the immediate fighting. The squad exchanged uneasy glances, but no one moved to stop him. Even in a world of hardened soldiers, there was a limit to cruelty when confronted with a living being in need. Elias worked quickly, setting up a small shielded area from debris and alien fire, improvising a barrier from fallen rocks and broken equipment. He covered the queen with a blanket-like material from his pack, careful not to touch her unnecessarily. Hours passed in silence. The sounds of battle faded into the distance as the tide shifted elsewhere on the battlefield. Elias kept a vigilant watch over the queen, noting the subtle changes in her breathing, the faint twitching of her limbs, the slight flicker of her antennae. She was not unconscious anymore. She was alert in some ways, aware but unable to communicate. Finally, she moved slightly, raising one of her clawed hands toward him. Elias froze, unsure of what to do. Then she placed it gently against his arm, a simple gesture but one that felt profound. He understood it as trust, fragile and tentative. A shiver ran down his spine. Here, in the middle of a war zone, he had found something extraordinary. The enemy, the being that had led countless attacks against humans, was capable of trust, even toward a human soldier. Elias smiled faintly. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered. "We'll figure this out together." The night fell, turning the strange purple plants into glowing shadows. The queen remained close to him, alert but resting. Elias thought about the war, about the countless lives lost, about the soldiers who would never come home. He thought about the humanity he carried with him, not in weapons or strategy, but in compassion and understanding. Saving this creature might seem like madness to some, but he knew that sometimes the greatest strength was in mercy. As the stars appeared in Zephora's alien sky, Elias felt a small flicker of hope. The battlefield was far from over. The war was not won, and danger still surrounded them. Yet in this quiet moment he had glimpsed the possibility of something greater. Not just victory, but understanding. Not just survival, but connection. And for the first time in weeks, he felt that maybe humans were capable of more than just fighting. They could inspire change, even in the most unlikely places. The alien queen shifted again, raising her eyes to his. There was no threat in them, only a spark of recognition, a hint that she understood he meant no harm. Elias knew that the next days would be dangerous. Her people would not trust easily, and humans would question his choices. But he was ready. He had lifted her from the ground, and now he would carry her through the challenges to come. For Captain Elias Kane, the war had suddenly changed. It was no longer just about survival or victory. It was about something larger, trust, empathy, and the courage to see beyond fear. And as he sat there under Zephora's glowing night sky, holding the being who had once been his enemy, he felt the stirring of a story that neither species had ever imagined. The morning sun rose over Zephora, casting strange shadows across the rocky plains. The purple plants glimmered faintly, releasing soft clouds of glowing pollen into the air. Elias Kane was already awake, sitting beside the alien queen, watching her slowly stir. Her eyes, wide and curious, followed every small movement he made. There was no hostility in them now, only something that resembled trust. Elias could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. This was no longer just a battle. It was a delicate balance between life and understanding. He had prepared a small area for her, using debris and equipment to create shelter. The barrier was crude, but it offered protection from stray attacks and from the harsh environment of Zephora. Elias knelt beside her, carefully adjusting the blanket-like covering he had draped over her. She shifted slightly, her many limbs folding in a way that suggested discomfort. He spoke softly. I know this is strange for you, but you're safe here. No one will harm you. The queen, Liara, as he had begun to call her in his mind, made a soft sound almost like a sigh. Elias didn't know if it was a word or just an instinctive noise, but he took it as acknowledgement. He realized that communication would not be simple. Their languages were completely different, and translation devices could not interpret her complex signals. Still, small gestures and patience could bridge the gap. Elias began preparing basic sustenance. Zyphora's soil was strange and its plants unfamiliar, but he managed to collect edible leaves and fruit-like growths that the queen seemed to recognize. Liara observed him closely, tilting her head and lifting one clawed hand as if to gesture approval. Elias smiled faintly. Even in a world of war, small victories mattered. As hours passed, Elias considered the larger problem. The queen's sudden collapse was not due to injury from weapons. He had seen her army falter slightly when she went down, as though their connection to her had been stronger than any chain. Elias suspected something deeper, something controlling her mind or weakening her will. He needed answers, and he knew the humans back at base would demand action, but he could not risk forcing her into something she did not understand. Liara stirred again, her eyes tracking him as he moved. She reached out one limb, touching his arm lightly. It was a simple gesture, but Elias felt a jolt of understanding. Trust was being built, fragile and tentative, but real. He returned the touch with his own hand, careful not to startle her. In that moment, he realized that both of them were learning. He was learning patience and empathy, while she was learning that not all humans were threats. Suddenly, a faint noise broke the quiet of the morning. The sound of distant movement, heavy and coordinated, approached. Elias immediately tensed, reaching for his weapon. Liara raised her eyes to him, but instead of fear, there was recognition, a hint that she understood the sound and perhaps even the danger it represented. He glanced toward the horizon and saw a patrol of Zyphorian soldiers, moving in patterns that suggested they were searching for their queen. Elias had only seconds to act. He whispered to Liara, "Stay still. Don't move." She lowered herself to the ground, pressing against the shelter he had made. Elias stood, placing himself between the approaching soldiers and the queen. They stopped when they saw him, their multiple eyes scanning him, scanning her. The soldiers were aggressive in stance but paused, confused by the unusual scene. A human protecting their leader. Elias raised his hand slightly, a universal gesture of peace. "She's injured," he said simply, hoping the tone conveyed truth even if the words could not. The soldiers hissed softly, a language of alarm and uncertainty, then began to move closer cautiously. Elias felt the tension in the air tighten. He knew one wrong move could ignite a battle he could not win. Liara shifted slightly and Elias saw a subtle change in the soldiers' behavior. They seemed to recognize her awareness of him, perhaps sensing the bond forming between them. Slowly the soldiers backed off, hissing and clicking, communicating among themselves. Elias kept his stance open, calm, and steady, projecting confidence. After what felt like an eternity, the patrol retreated, leaving only silence and the faint hum of Ziphora's living ground. Elias exhaled slowly, glancing down at Liara. She regarded him with multiple eyes, attentive and calm. He realized then that the situation had changed entirely. She was no longer just a prisoner or an enemy. She was an ally in understanding, fragile yet powerful. The hours turned into days, and Elias settled into a routine. He scavenged food, repaired minor injuries, and spent time observing Liara. She began to mimic some of his gestures, slowly learning to communicate in small ways. A tilt of the head, a shift of a limb, a soft sound, each conveyed meaning. Elias began to understand her reactions, her warnings, and even her sense of humor, subtle though it was. During this time, Elias discovered a troubling truth. He had been right in suspecting that the queen's collapse was not natural. She carried signs of stress and control far beyond normal fatigue. There were faint traces of an alien parasite within her neural network, something that forced her species into coordinated attacks, overriding their own will. The realization hit him hard. The war was not merely about conquest or survival. It was being manipulated by an unseen force that used both species as pawns. Liara sensed his concern. She reached out, touching his arm lightly, then pressed her many eyes to him, as though asking what had troubled him. Elias took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility. He knew that saving her was no longer enough. They needed to uncover the truth, and they needed to do it together. The following night, a storm swept across Zephora. Thunder rumbled through the jagged mountains, and lightning illuminated the alien flora in bursts of violet and green. Elias and Liara huddled beneath their makeshift shelter, the sound of rain pattering on the rocks above them. He spoke softly, narrating stories of Earth, of human history, of battles fought and peace achieved. Liara listened, tilting her head, her antennae twitching with curiosity. She could not understand the words fully, but she seemed to absorb the emotion behind them. Through these quiet nights, a bond formed. Elias realized that humans were capable of remarkable strength, not just through weapons, but through empathy, trust, and patience. Liara, for her part, began to show glimpses of her species' intelligence in ways Elias had never witnessed. She mimicked gestures, learned routines, and even began to anticipate his actions. It was a small, fragile alliance, but it was powerful. One morning, as the sky turned soft pink with the rising sun, Elias observed Liara moving more confidently. She stood, her limbs stretching, and looked toward the horizon. He knew she was ready to act, but the question remained. How would they confront the source of the parasite controlling her people? The answer was unclear, but Elias felt a determination growing within him. He had chosen to act with compassion, and that choice had opened a path to something larger than himself. Elias made a decision. They would leave the safe zone and find the source of the parasite. It would be dangerous, likely more so than anything he had faced before, but he was no longer acting alone. Liara was awake, aware, and capable of intelligence and strategy. Together, they could navigate the dangers ahead. As they prepared to move, Liara extended a limb toward him, a gesture of trust. Elias grasped it firmly, feeling the connection between them. He spoke softly, "We will do this together. You and I will set things right." She made a soft clicking sound, acknowledging him in the only way she could. Elias knew that this fragile understanding was the key to survival, not just for them, but potentially for both species. The first steps toward the larger world outside their shelter were tentative. Elias carried supplies and Liara followed, adapting to the terrain with surprising agility. The bond they had formed made them almost inseparable. He realized that this was more than a soldier helping a fallen enemy. It was a partnership built on respect, patience, and understanding, a bridge between two worlds that had never truly connected before. As they moved, Elias noticed the distant movements of her soldiers. They were searching still, but there was no aggression. Perhaps they sensed the shift in her will, the growing strength she had gained from rest and recovery. Elias hoped that one day they would understand that their queen had been freed from the invisible chains controlling her mind, and that the war could be stopped not by force, but by intelligence and trust. The journey ahead would be perilous. The parasite that manipulated Liara and her people was cunning and powerful. But Elias Kane had never relied on weapons alone. He had strength, courage, and now empathy. And Liara, the alien queen, was learning that humans could be more than conquerors. They could be allies, guides, and even friends. As the sun rose higher over Zephora, painting the rocky plains in golden light, Elias glanced at Liara. She moved with confidence now, her eyes bright and alert. Together they stepped forward, leaving the remnants of the battlefield behind. The war was not over, but for the first time there was hope that it could end differently than anyone expected. And for Elias Kane, the mission had changed. It was no longer just about survival or victory. It was about understanding, trust, and the courage to see beyond the surface of fear. It was about proving that humans were capable of greatness not just in battle but in heart. The journey across Zephora's jagged plains was exhausting, but Elias and Liara moved with determination. Every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the mystery, the source of the parasite that had controlled Liara and her people. The alien landscape stretched endlessly, full of glowing plants, twisting cliffs, and strange undulating terrain. Elias had never seen a world so alive, as if Zephora itself was a conscious being, watching their every move. Liara had regained much of her strength. She moved with agility, her many limbs flexing and gripping the rocky surfaces with ease. Elias walked beside her, constantly aware of the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had led countless missions before, but none like this. This was not only a fight against an enemy, it was a journey to free a species from invisible chains and to prevent a war that could spread beyond Zephora. They moved cautiously, avoiding patrols of Zyphorian soldiers who had not yet realized that their queen had regained control of her own mind. Liara's presence altered the soldiers' behavior subtly. They would pause, their movements hesitant, their eyes flicking toward her as if sensing something unfamiliar. Elias noted this carefully. It gave them an advantage, but it also reminded him of how fragile the situation remained. As they climbed a ridge overlooking a deep valley, Elias finally saw it. The bioship. It floated in the sky like a dark monolith, tethered to the planet by glowing energy streams that pulsed rhythmically. The structure was massive, more machine than organic, yet it seemed alive, almost breathing in sync with the terrain below. Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a hive of control, a central point of the parasite's influence. Liara stopped beside him, her eyes tracking the ship. Elias could feel her tension. Even though she was free from direct control, the parasite's presence still pulsed through her mind like a faint hum. He realized that confronting it would not be easy. They would need to act carefully, combining human strategy and alien insight to succeed. Elias crouched low, observing the entrance points. Energy barriers and patrols of drones made a direct attack impossible. He turned to Liara. "We need to get inside," he said softly. "But we have to do it quietly. One mistake and it could be over before it even begins." Liara tilted her head, understanding his meaning. She stepped forward and Elias followed. Together, they navigated the jagged cliffs using shadows and natural cover to approach the bioship. The closer they got, the more Elias noticed the faint vibrations in the ground, the pulse of the parasite's influence, connecting every Zephorian soldier like invisible threads. He realized that disrupting this connection would require reaching the core of the bioship itself. They reached a narrow ledge overlooking one of the energy streams feeding into the ship. Elias studied the patterns carefully. "We'll have to cross here," he whispered. "It's the only way that won't trigger the defenses." Liara moved beside him, her limbs carefully balancing on the narrow stone. Together they crept across, the faint hum of energy vibrating through the rocks beneath them. Once inside, the interior of the bioship was even more alien. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins and strange symbols moved across surfaces as if alive. The parasite's presence was stronger here, an oppressive weight that pressed on their minds. Elias felt a moment of doubt. This was unlike anything he had ever encountered, a network of control that reached into the hearts and minds of living beings. But he steeled himself, gripping his weapon, though he knew brute force would not solve this problem. Liara led the way, her instincts guiding them through corridors that seemed to shift subtly as if aware of their intrusion. Elias followed closely, observing her movements and learning from her intuition. They came across Zyphorian soldiers patrolling the hallways, still partially under the parasite's influence. Liara approached them cautiously, making soft sounds that Elias could not understand but which seemed to calm or distract the soldiers. Elias marveled at her intelligence, the way she used her presence not to attack but to navigate and neutralize threats. After what felt like hours, they reached the central chamber. It was enormous, filled with a glowing neural web that connected directly to the walls and floors. Pulses of light ran through it like veins, and at its center, a dark, writhing mass pulsed with a malevolent energy. Elias felt it immediately. The parasite was aware of them, sensing their presence and resisting. Liara stepped forward, her many eyes fixed on the mass. Elias stayed behind her, ready to act. "I think this is it," he said. "This is what's controlling your people." Liara made a soft clicking sound, acknowledging him. She raised her limbs toward the network, and Elias realized that they would need to combine their abilities, her alien connection and his human ingenuity. Elias began analyzing the energy pulses, searching for weak points. He noticed patterns, repetitions that suggested timing and vulnerability. Liara, in turn, focused her mind on the network, feeling the flow of energy, the connections to her soldiers and the threads that bound her own will. Together, they formed a plan. They would disrupt the network from within, severing the parasite's control without destroying the Xiphorians it had enslaved. The process was dangerous. Every moment they hesitated, the network pulsed, sending out waves that threatened to overwhelm Liara's senses. Elias guided her, speaking softly, keeping her focused. "Steady," he whispered. "We can do this, one step at a time." Liara reached out, touching the pulsing mass with one of her limbs. Elias followed, carefully applying a device he had brought, an improvised disruptor designed to interfere with the neural connections. Sparks of energy crackled and the chamber vibrated violently. The parasite reacted, sending out pulses of resistance. Elias felt the heat of energy lancing toward them, but Liara shielded him with her limbs, her strength and agility astonishing. Minutes passed like hours. Slowly the pulses weakened. Liara's coordination with Elias proved perfect. They were acting as one mind and body, human and alien working together. Finally, with a final surge of energy, the central mass convulsed, then went still. The oppressive weight lifted, and a sense of calm spread through the chamber. Liara collapsed briefly, exhausted, and Elias caught her, holding her steady. She looked at him with multiple eyes, blinking slowly. Elias smiled, feeling relief flood through him. "We did it," he said softly. She made a sound almost like a laugh, and Elias realized that this was her way of expressing joy, gratitude, and recognition. As they stood, Elias observed the effects throughout the ship. The Xiphorian soldiers paused, confused but no longer hostile. The influence that had driven them to fight without question was gone. Liara turned to them, making soft sounds and gestures, and the soldiers responded, cautious but now free. Elias watched this exchange in awe. The war had changed in a single act, but the implications were enormous. Elias and Liara knew their task was not complete. They needed to return to the surface and ensure that the planet itself would not remain under threat. Yet in this moment they shared a victory unlike any Elias had ever experienced. It was not won with weapons alone, but with courage, trust, and collaboration across species. They made their way back through the corridors, moving carefully but confidently. Liara guided Elias, her instincts now fully free from the parasite's influence. He marveled at her intelligence, her strategic mind, and the depth of her awareness. She had been a queen under control, and now she was fully herself, strong, aware, and capable of shaping the future. Emerging from the bioship into the alien sunlight, Elias felt the warmth of Ziphora's day on his skin. Liara paused beside him, raising her eyes toward the horizon. The alien soldiers, now free from control, gathered around her. There was no fear, no aggression, only recognition and trust. Elias realized that they had achieved something extraordinary. Two species, once enemies, now shared a moment of understanding and potential peace. As Elias looked at Liara, he understood the true meaning of their journey. Humans were capable of empathy, courage, and insight that could change the course of events even on a world far from Earth. Liara's species was intelligent, strong, and capable of greatness. Together they had bridged a gap that once seemed impossible, showing that the greatest battles were sometimes fought not with weapons, but with understanding. They began to move down the cliffs, Elias supporting Liara when the terrain became treacherous. The freed soldiers followed, forming a protective formation. Elias felt a sense of pride unlike any he had ever known. He had chosen mercy when many would have chosen violence, and that choice had led to victory. It was a lesson in the power of human character, the strength that came from empathy, patience, and courage. By the time they reached the plains below, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. Elias and Liara paused, taking in the scene. Xiphora was a world of beauty, danger, and life, and for the first time in months it felt at peace. The war was not entirely over, but a new path had been created, one where humans and Xiphorians could work together, where trust could replace fear, and where understanding Elias turned to Liara. "We'll make sure your people are safe," he said softly. She made a sound that seemed to affirm this promise. Together they walked forward, carrying the lessons of courage, trust, and unity into a world that had never seen such an owl. The plains of Xiphora stretched endlessly beneath the rising sun, painted with soft shades of violet and gold. Elias, Kane, and Liara moved carefully across the rocky ground, now free from the immediate threat of the parasite. The air seemed lighter, as if the planet itself sensed the change. Xiphorian soldiers walked nearby, their movements slower, thoughtful, and no longer driven by the invisible chains that had forced them to fight. Elias felt the weight of the moment settle over him. They had survived, yes, but more importantly, they had begun something new. Liara paused beside a glowing plant, its petals opening like the wings of a bird. She bent one limb gently toward it, observing its reaction, then looked at Elias with multiple eyes that seemed almost curious. He knelt beside her, placing a hand carefully on her arm. "We've done it," he said softly. "Your people are free. They can choose now." Liara made a sound that Elias instinctively understood as gratitude. It was subtle, but it carried weight, a connection that went beyond words. The bond between them had grown from trust, compassion, and shared struggle. Elias realized that this was not just an alliance, it was a bridge between species, a chance to show that humans were capable of more than war. As they walked, the freed Xiphorian soldiers began to gather around Liara. They moved with respect, yet without fear, communicating with one another in their own language. Elias watched carefully. Some soldiers paused, looking at him with cautious eyes, unsure of his role in their freedom. Liara stepped forward, lifting one limb toward Elias in a subtle gesture. It was an introduction, a sign to her people that he was no longer an enemy. Slowly the soldiers relaxed, nodding or making soft clicks. Elias smiled faintly. It was a small victory, but one that carried immense meaning. The journey toward Liara's capital was long, but they moved steadily. Elias carried supplies, monitored the soldiers, and guided Liara through unfamiliar terrain. The alien landscape, while breathtaking, was not without danger. Jagged cliffs, hidden fissures, and strange wildlife required constant attention. Liara, agile and alert, scouted ahead, occasionally turning to check on Elias. There was a rhythm to their movement now, a harmony born of shared purpose and trust. As they approached the city, Elias saw the enormity of what Liara's people had built. Towers of gleaming crystal and bioorganic materials rose from the ground, connected by bridges that shimmered with energy. Despite the beauty, there was tension in the air. Soldiers and citizens alike were wary, unsure how to react to the sight of humans among them. Elias adjusted his stance, raising his hand slightly to show peace. Liara moved beside him, her presence commanding attention. The first to approach were the senior advisors of Liara's species, their many eyes narrowing as they assessed the humans. Elias felt the scrutiny, but he remained calm. He knew that the only way forward was through honesty and courage, the traits that had carried him this far. Liara made a series of clicks and gestures, speaking to them in her language. Elias could not understand the words, but he watched the reaction closely. The advisor's posture softened slightly, their antennae lowering, a sign of recognition and acceptance. Liara then turned to Elias, gesturing for him to step forward. He did so carefully, keeping his hands visible and his expression calm. The advisor studied him, and for a tense moment nothing happened. Then one stepped forward, touching Liara's limb lightly and nodding toward Elias. The gesture was simple yet powerful. It was a form of introduction, a silent acknowledgement that Elias had played a role in their freedom. The tension among the gathered Xiphorians eased, replaced by cautious curiosity. Elias spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "I am Elias Kane," he said. "I am a soldier from Earth. I did not come to harm your queen or your people. I only wanted to help." He paused, feeling the weight of the moment. "Your queen is free now, and your people can choose their own path. I hope that we can work together, instead of against each other." Liara made a sound, soft and melodic, then gestured toward the city. The advisors spoke among themselves, and Elias observed closely. Finally, one turned to him, moving a limb toward the city gates in a welcoming motion. Elias felt a sense of relief. They had accepted him cautiously, but acceptance was a start. Liara's people were willing to see humans not as enemies, but as allies. Inside the city, Elias marveled at the blend of architecture and nature. Buildings grew organically, connected by glowing pathways, and the citizens moved with a grace that was both foreign and beautiful. Liara guided him through the streets, her movements commanding attention yet gentle. The people paused, observing, whispering among themselves, but there was no fear, only curiosity. Elias noticed children, smaller members of the species, watching with wide eyes. He offered a small smile and a nod which seemed to calm them. In the city's central chamber, Liara addressed her people. She spoke in clicks, gestures, and melodic tones, her voice carrying authority and calm. Elias watched, feeling the significance of the moment. For the first time in history, A human and an alien queen stood together as equals, partners in a mission that had saved countless lives. Her words, though alien, conveyed freedom, hope, and the importance of choice. Elias understood the meaning even without translation. After her address, Liara turned to Elias, and he could see gratitude in her gaze. "You risked yourself for me," she communicated through gestures. "You showed my people a path they had not seen before." Elias nodded. "It was the right thing to do," he replied. "Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that save more than just lives." Over the next days, humans and Xiphorians worked together to ensure the stability of the planet. Patrols once driven by the parasite's influence now acted to protect citizens and maintain peace. Elias assisted in training joint squads, teaching strategies that combined human ingenuity with Xiphorian agility and intelligence. Liara observed, offering guidance and insight, creating a new model of cooperation between their species. Elias noticed subtle changes in the Xiphorian soldiers. They moved with confidence, no longer fearful of the queen or blindly aggressive. They began to communicate with humans in small ways, gestures, shared signals, and eventually rudimentary words. Trust, once fragile, was growing into understanding. Liara, too, adapted to this new era. She had been a leader under control, but now she was fully herself. Her decisions were thoughtful, her actions deliberate, and her intelligence shone in every choice she made. Elias found himself learning from her, understanding the depth of her culture and the complexities of her people. Together, they built a foundation for a future neither species had imagined before. One evening, as the twin moons of Xiphora rose, Elias and Liara stood on a high balcony overlooking the city. The streets below glowed softly, alive with citizens and soldiers working side by side. Elias felt a sense of accomplishment not from battle, but from what they had created. Liara turned to him, her multiple eyes reflecting the moons. "You showed them what humans can be," she said through gestures and soft sounds. "Not just warriors, but allies, protectors, and thinkers. You changed everything." Elias smiled faintly. "We all have the choice to be better," he replied. "I only did what I hoped was right." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the peaceful city. For Elias, this was more than a mission. It was proof that humans could inspire change through courage, empathy, and understanding. For Liara, it was the dawn of a new era, one where her people could live free from manipulation and choose their own paths. In the days that followed, joint missions continued. Humans helped rebuild areas damaged during the parasite's control, while Xiphorians shared knowledge of their environment, technology, and culture. Bonds formed between soldiers and citizens of both species. They learned from each other, laughed together, and faced challenges as partners. Elias often thought back to the moment he had lifted Liara from the battlefield. That single act of compassion had changed everything. It had built trust, forged alliances, and shown that even in a universe filled with conflict, understanding could prevail. He realized that humans were capable of greatness not just through strength, but through empathy, patience, and courage. Liara, now fully free and aware, continued to lead her people with wisdom and vision. She honored the alliance with humans, ensuring that both species could coexist and thrive. Elias remained by her side as an advisor and friend, a bridge between worlds that had once been divided. The planet Xiphora, once a battlefield, now hummed with life, hope, and possibility. Humans and Xiphorians moved forward together, learning from one another, building a future that neither could have imagined alone. Elias Kane knew that this was the true meaning of strength. The ability to see beyond fear, to act with compassion, and to inspire others to do the same. As the twin moons cast their gentle light across the city, Elias and Liara stood together looking at a world transformed. They had faced darkness, controlled by forces beyond their understanding, yet through trust and courage they had emerged stronger. And in that moment both knew that the future was not written by fear or violence, but by the choices of those. Elias lifted his gaze to the horizon. The sky was filled with the glow of both human and Xiphorian ships, a symbol of unity and cooperation. He felt hope, pride, and a deep sense of purpose. Liara's presence beside him,